Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Imran Chaudhry, and I have the privilege of serving as the CIO for the CJCC. My role today will be to hopefully direct traffic and keep us on time. And I must be doing a great job because we're already 3 minutes ahead of schedule, actually 4 minutes ahead of schedule. So without further ado, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our first moderator. The pattern will be essentially, I'll be able to give you an introduction to the moderator, who will then in turn introduce his or her panelists. Our first session is Transitioning to NIBRS, the Future of Reporting and Its Implications, and this is moderated by Paul Wormeli. Paul is known within the Integrated Justice Information System community from coast to coast. He is recognized as an innovator. He's also an entrepreneur, and he's been involved in public safety, law enforcement, criminal justice, and homeland security since the 70s. He was also, and Paul's list of accomplishments, you can't mention them in one breath, so I'll take a couple here. He was the first National Director of Project Search. He was also appointed by the President as Deputy Administrator of the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, and he has also served as an advisor to the White House on security and privacy issues. Paul was also the first full-time Executive Director of the IBIS Institute and the first Chairman of the National Information Exchange Model Communications and Outreach Community. For the non-techies in the room, the acronym for that is NIBRS, and this is the standard by which information is exchanged amongst criminal justice entities. This was really Paul's baby, and it's something that he recognized decades ago, and which has really just gained national prominence over the past 5, 6, 7 years potentially. It's something that we've looked at within the district as well, and this is really as a result of the path that Paul laid out for us to consider and implement. Paul's also the author of a blog, The IBIS Factor, which was named amongst the 50 must-read blogs on federal information technology by FedTech. He's authored numerous articles, and he holds a BS in electronics engineering from the University of New Mexico, and a master's in engineering and administration from George Washington University. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Wormeli.
Thank you. This long list of introductions is only because I've lived too long. But I was telling Judge Leibowitz earlier that I've figured out a way to deal with my critics, and that's to outlive them. But I'm delighted to be back with you at CJCC and to have this opportunity to talk about one of the most exciting topics in the whole criminal justice field, and that's how do we get and use better data about what it is we're about. And that's really the topic of this first session. We have an excellent panel to present to you, and I'd like the panelists to come sit up here so you can stare at them. Heidi and Rosa and Erica. Thank you very much. I'm going to hopefully find some slides and give you a little bit of an introduction to this topic. I think it's just a thrill to have all of you here to talk about this because it's so important to everybody in the room. And we're really going to address the topic of why NIBRS matters and why this change in how we describe the context of crime in our country is so important to all of us. Just a very, very brief summary for those of you who may not be that familiar with crime reporting and statistics. It was 85 years ago that the IACP, International Association of Chiefs of Police, said, you know what, we better try to come up with some way to measure the crime, at least the more serious crimes, and they invented this thing called Uniform Crime Reports, and very soon they asked the FBI to collect the data from initially a sample of 300 police departments around the country and say, let's use that as a measure of the trends in crime. And we've been doing that same thing for 85 years. We haven't changed that model. And almost ever since that was created, the people who do research and gather statistics and look for lessons learned in data have complained about the summary notion of the Uniform Crime Reports, because it's just a tally. And it was, for the last maybe 10 years, it's just been a tally of 8 primary offenses, homicide, etc. And in the 80s, the FBI and the criminal justice community, law enforcement community in particular, said, you know, that just doesn't cut it. I had the privilege of facilitating a meeting of a crime indicators working group put together by the Bureau of Justice Statistics in the last couple of years, and a very prestigious set of chiefs of police who said, you know, we don't use this crime data, this UCR data. It's useless. What happens is the FBI publishes a report 9 months after the year ends, which by then is old news, and the press picks it up, and you all see it in the papers every August. Crime is up, crime is down, crime is sideways. You know, what do we do with that? Nothing. You know, the press loves it because they have something, they have an article they could put on page 12 of the Washington Post, and that's the end of it. Police look at it and say, there's no so what there. And that's partly because we can't answer the questions that we really need to answer in order to improve the quality of justice in America. We can't look at the percentage of the elderly who have been abused by criminal activity. We can't look at the impact on children. We can't look at domestic violence. We can't disaggregate the data. Erica Smith, who sits over here in the Bureau of Justice Statistics, gets calls from Congress every day and say, you know, what's going on with a different type of crime? And they can't answer the question because of this summary count that UCR does. So this thing called NIBRS, a National Incident-Based Reporting System, got developed, and the simple summary of it is that instead of just counting the number of these 8 serious crimes in the country, what the whole NIBRS concept is to collect 52 different data elements on every incident that we define as a crime. And not just count the most serious offense, like murder outweighs robbery and rape and so on, but count all the offenses or record all the offenses. So you can now disaggregate the data and drill down and answer the questions of what's going on with juvenile violence, what's going on with crimes against the elderly, how do we get a better understanding of the context of crime, not just counts that we post on some bulletin board somewhere. So the FBI created this notion in the really late 80s, and it was rolled out in the late 80s, early 90s, and today, 6,800 police agencies in the country report their data to the FBI using the NIBRS format rather than UCR. That's about 1/3 of all the police departments in the country. The unfortunate part of that is that most of the larger agencies, including Metropolitan Police Department, for years have said, well, you know, it's all well and good, but it's really too much trouble to get all that good data together. You know, we don't have a records management system that collects it, and we can't deal with it all, and for whatever reasons. So the larger agencies have objected to it. However, that's changing, as many, many large police departments in the country have, and you'll hear more about how we're attempting to make that a reality, to get those larger agencies included as well, so that we can publish nationally representative statistics based on the analysis that NIBRS allows us to do. And I'll talk just a little bit more about that. So the trend is very clear, and I'm going to talk really about 3 things for you about what's happened in the last year, about what the road is to tomorrow and how it impacts the district and all of your agencies and everything you do in many different ways, and then what's going to be in the future a little like about that. 2016 was an absolute watershed year in this whole evolution of how we report crimes in this country and how we deal with the data. And you can see that the major law enforcement associations, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Major City Chiefs Association, the Major County Sheriffs Association, the National Sheriffs Association, signed the same letter and sent it to the FBI and said, you know what, if we're going to make this crime data useful to us, we have to stop counting just the summary data like this, and we have to move to NIBRS. And based on that recommendation and the support from the FBI's Advisory Policy Board, the FBI director last year issued an order that said, okay, we're going to stop this old 85-year-old practice of counting the 8 most serious crimes, and we're going to go to NIBRS by January 2021, all agencies in the country. And we're just not going to have that summary data anymore. Now, if you don't think there's any other good reason to do this, there is a well-known fact that the data that we've been collecting in this Uniform Crime Reporting Program has been the basis for how much grant money gets allocated. And when that goes away, it's going to eventually be replaced by NIBRS. So there's a kind of a motivating factor here for law enforcement agencies to get on board if they really want to be eligible for grant money. But aside from that, this momentum has started. So this is one of the 5 directors' priorities in the FBI, and even though the last FBI director is no longer in office, those directives persist, and they're still being pursued by the FBI staff and in conjunction with the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and we're happy to note that momentum is continuing. One thing that's happened in 2026, really a little bit before that, was that the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is the official agency in government that has a responsibility for these statistics, has developed a collaborative process with the FBI, and Erica Smith on the panel is one of the keys to this whole process, to really work together in ways they never did before to help state and local law enforcement agencies implement this new model. And that has really changed how we're moving forward, to the point where the FBI actually came up with funding to give to BJS, who has the grant-making authority to issue grants, to encourage the larger agencies and some smaller agencies in a sample, and Erica will talk more about that when we introduce her, about how to make this incentives. At the same time, the United Nations came up with a new model of how to classify crimes to help us refine our understanding of the context of crimes, and that got published in the Office of Management and Budget with the support from the FBI and the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and empowered a panel by the National Academy of Sciences that I serve on modernizing crime statistics to look at how we can in the U.S. get to the next evolution of crime reporting in a much more powerful way. So there's all kinds of progress going on in this last year that make it attractive and interesting for agencies to look at this new approach. And it really has resulted in a paradigm shift. We're no longer talking about a system, and some of you probably have heard this or have said it yourselves, that, the attitude on the part of law enforcement over the years since 1930, when UCR was created, is, oh, this is a system where we got to report this data to the feds, right? It's a statistical system, so we have to give the data to the feds. We're not going to use it, but we have to do it because they told us we have to do it, right? That attitude is rapidly going away. The idea of creating a way to collect and use data for your own purposes and not just in the police world, but for the criminal justice system, to understand the fundamental context of crime and how our policies in the courts and the prosecutor and corrections influence the incidence of crime is what we're about here. Crime statistics are no longer a purpose in themselves, but are an instrument of affecting change and affecting policy across the whole criminal justice system. And that's a new cultural shift, and I could call it a paradigm shift in how we think about this data and how I encourage you to think about it. It's of value to every component of criminal justice as a way to understand how your policies and practices impact the safety of our community. So there's a lot of really solid arguments for why NIBRS is a good idea and why agencies are today thinking more positively about it. We know that by adopting the discipline that's inherent in the collection of this data, and there's a set of rules for counting that go with it and edits in the collection of the data, it will fundamentally radically improve the quality of crime data that's collected. I was a consultant in the district many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, when there was a scandal about crime reporting here. Some of you may have been around in those days, and the press had a field day with the undercounting of crime in the district. And it was at the time because the police leadership and the MPD said, well, you know, we really don't want to tell everybody how much crime we have, because then they'll say we're not doing a good job, right? So there was an undercounting, and I helped the department back then get out of that mess, and they improved it for a while, but UCR allows you to do that in a way that NIBRS does not. The edit rules and the discipline in entering the data and to meet the requirements of NIBRS makes it a lot harder to abuse the process of collecting the data and shape it to your own ends. NIBRS improves the accuracy of crime classification because a lot of in the NIBRS system there are 47 different offense categories that can be described, and if a good software system like the one that's being developed for MPD will execute those classifications right at the level of where the data is entered as opposed to later on and after the fact. So it makes it a much more accurate and complete and useful classification. It also, when you follow a standard like this, it makes information sharing not only throughout the district and across the criminal justice system, but with other jurisdictions much more feasible and useful. You have a unique problem in the district. You all know that, with the mixture of federal agencies, state agencies, overlapping jurisdictions. It's a very complicated issue. If all of the agencies that deal with crime, who have a jurisdictional responsibility in the district, federal as well as MPD, are all using the same standards, our understanding of the totality of crime would be greatly improved. But not only is it important for the district itself, but for looking at crime across the region. There's a very effective Council of Governments, as you well know, that tries to collaborate across Maryland, Virginia, and the district, and having everyone using the same standard allows us to look at crime on a regional basis. And that has been shown over and over again by the research that's been done in the district. People don't stick to a particular jurisdiction when they commit crimes. They travel across the state borders, whether it's getting guns in Virginia or dealing with crimes across the border in Maryland. We need an understanding of the totality of the geographic region, not just the boundaries that we've arbitrarily drawn from jurisdictions. And having a common standard makes it possible to describe the totality of crime, but also to do benchmarking, to be able to do that for yourselves. So what's the real impact? All these arguments I just made are kind of technical arguments, and you could probably nod your head and say, yeah, Paul's got some good points there, but what's the real meat of this? The real meat of why NIBRS is important is this. In this country, over the last decade or more, we've all come to the conclusion that what we really want to see is evidence-based policing. We can call it data-driven policing or intelligence-led policing, but it really means let us have the evidence to prove what policies and practices are most effective in reducing crime. We want to base that on real data and on evidence, not on supposition or anecdotes. The days are long past when a few police executives can sit in a room and say, you know, let's pull something out of the air and figure out how we're going to deal with gun violence or drugs or whatever. We need to look to gather evidence. But you can't afford to do the kind of blind study to collect evidence on each and every problem you want to address. It's too expensive for any jurisdiction. But if you routinely collect data in a form that is useful for the researchers and the policy analysts and the people that are looking at evaluating a particular program, policy, or process, then you have an ongoing, continual collection of data that will help you develop the evidence to show whether or not policies work. This is true whether you're dealing with police policies, prosecutorial policies, correctional policies, or court processing. Yesterday morning I was in St. Louis listening to them talk about a major study on firearms violence and trying to track a cohort of people arrested for firearms violence from the point of arrest through the courts, through the prosecutor, through the courts and correctional systems. And the reason that they could begin to do that is that St. Louis has been using NIBRS for many, many years, and they had that raw data on the arrests that were aggregated, or segregated down into the kind of offender and the characteristics of the past characteristics and the details that NIBRS offers. So they had that baseline data to begin to look across the criminal justice system on the problem of gun violence in St. Louis, which in their view is their #1 problem. So it shows the ability to collect evidence about how policies work, not just basing our policies on anecdotal notions or, random ideas of how do we make change. One of the things that, and anybody that's ever been associated with seeking or approving grants will tell you is too often the case in the country that criminal justice agencies that apply for a grant or come up with a new policy don't articulate a theory of change. And if you don't have a theory of change to start with, then how do you know if you succeeded? And if you want to know whether you succeeded or not, somehow you have to measure whether you're succeeded or not, which means you need metrics, and NIBRS is at least part of that system of helping you count that. So this whole idea of NIBRS is support for evidence-based policing. It's also the key to benchmarking agency performance. We're working very hard, Erica will talk more about this, I'm sure, with Maryland agencies to get Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Baltimore County to move to NIBRS and the whole state of Maryland. Virginia's already there. If once we have that reality and the district has moved to NIBRS, you're going to be able to look at comparable data from those jurisdictions, perhaps even down to the neighborhood level, and say what works in different neighborhoods, comparable neighborhoods in the district to Baltimore or to Montgomery County or whatever. The driver for a lot of this is actually public policy formulation. If you're going to attack problems and whatever your priorities strategically turn out to be, if it's dealing with the crimes against the elderly or crimes against children or the drug problems or the opioid crisis, you have to have some data that defines the scope of the problem and measures the efficacy of the intervention that you choose to undertake. Now, how else can you know whether you've done something useful or not? This is a way to focus on the data that routinely needs to be collected, not for the purpose of satisfying some federal statistical urge, but for the purpose of providing insights into the support for public policy that's defendable to the public. It's the only way that you can do that, is to provide that data that says, yes, we did X and it resulted in Y. The outcome of our work is measurable by the way we've changed the numbers. So the whole basis for NIBRS that makes it most exciting to people who want to do this is that NIBRS allows you to segment the data about crime into describing the context of crime, to deal with what's happening with crimes against not just the age differentiation by the elderly, but looking at problems of domestic abuse and the stranger kinds of crimes versus domestic crimes, and what those problems are, to describe those problems in a way that policies can be developed to attack those particular strategies or problems that you decide are important in your jurisdiction and in your discipline. And that's what NIBRS lets you do. So here's the map we're on. And I'm going to use this as a way of introducing our next speaker. The timing is very important here. We're on a path to get all the states to create a NIBRS repository capability to collect data from local agencies and report that to the FBI. There's a program, the National Crime Statistics Exchange, that I'm going to ask Erica to tell you about, to add 400 more agencies to the 6,800 already supporting NIBRS, so that we can create national statistics. There's a movement to update the NIBRS model. There's already been changes made by the FBI and its advisory policy board to deal with things like cybercrime and cargo theft and changing the rape definition and improving it, which those changes are going to be minimized between now and 2021, when we hope to make this transition complete. But we're going to move to create the single national standard of NIBRS, expanding it to all the agencies, all 18,000 police departments in the country, and then sunset the Uniform Crime Reporting Summary Statistical Program. So that's the road we're on. There's all kinds of support at the federal level and in the community for this jurisdiction to move to NIBRS, and we're going to hear more about the plans from MPD in a little bit. But before we get into that, to help you understand this, I'd like to introduce Dr. Erica Smith. Erica is the unit chief of the Law Enforcement Incident-Based Statistics Unit at the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And it's her privilege and honor to manage this whole transformation from the perspective of BJS. Erica has been involved in research and statistical analysis in the criminal justice system for over 20 years and worked on a lot of different areas, but she was promoted to this job as unit chief to handle these kinds of problems related to law enforcement incident-based statistics. And she's not only managed this NCSX project, but she's also was very instrumental in a project that I helped with and coordinating and working with the Criminal Indicators Working Group to define from the police executive perspective what the needs are for better crime data and statistics that will help us evaluate police practices and productivity. So she's got a long history at BJS as well as in her career, even though she's only 22. But Erica, would you tell us a little bit about how this transition's going and what BJS is up to?
Sure. Hi, thank you. I appreciate being here this morning. So as Paul said, I'm Unit Chief at the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and in that capacity I direct the National Crime Statistics Exchange Program. So Paul had mentioned earlier, excuse me, that we would get all these data requests asking for what should be relatively simple pieces of information to generate. How many domestic assaults occurred in the last year? How many stranger crimes were committed over the last 10 years? Things that sound like simple metrics. Most of the time when I present information about this project in front of local law enforcement agencies, I ask for a show of hands how many agencies can produce that information on their own. And most of the time, almost every hand in the room goes up. But I can't do that at a national level, and we were really getting a lot of flack, to be honest, often from reporters, because they have the ability to say those things out loud and get us in trouble for it. So we embarked on this project quite a while back, actually. I believe it was 2012 when we first sort of stepped toward this idea of getting more incident-based data. The NIBRS platform was already there. As Paul had said, about 1/3 of law enforcement agencies in the country already use it. They already report to the system at the FBI. And so we formed a partnership with the FBI to expand capacity within the existing NIBRS system. It was a phenomenal effort at the time because BJS and the FBI had never, I think, partnered formally on anything in the history of the agencies. And so we had a lot of barriers to break down at the federal level in order to make that happen. But at this point right now, we have a fully formed partnership. We have agreements signed. The FBI is funding a large portion of this project. So they provide that funding to us to administer out for the National Crime Statistics Exchange. And the way that we have formulated the program is that it's a interim step, is how we're viewing it, toward the full transition that Paul was talking about earlier. As we grow and expand NIBRS, BJS has set about to do it in a sample-based way. So we have identified 400 specific agencies that if we add those 400, get them to report data to the system, add them to the existing reporters, we as a federal agency can generate national estimates. We can also work toward different models of establishing state-based, county-based, and local level estimates based on the data that we have available to us as additional agencies come onto the platform. So the idea is that we get the 400 up and running. We support the states in those efforts as well because they're a critical component to the reporting structure. Get that infrastructure laid out over the next couple of years, hopefully, and then other agencies will work toward getting onto the NIBRS platform and hopefully meet the January 2021 deadline that was established by the FBI. So in order for us to do that, we have been making grants over the last couple of years. In FY15, BJS put out a small bit of their own funding. We formalized agreements with the FBI for the funding support from them, and then we put out additional funds last year. So far in the last 2 fiscal cycles, we've funded just over $32 million worth of NCSX-specific grant projects. We also have some agreements with state programs to bring on their local agencies through their own funding streams or through support from us, but through the state system as well. And then this year, right now, currently available for eligible agencies to apply are 3 additional grant funding opportunities. 2 were released last week and 1 was just released yesterday. So we're moving forward with providing additional funding. The critical piece there is that, most of the agencies, when we started this process, we did a small survey of the 400 agencies we had identified. And we asked them essentially what were their reporting capabilities, tell us a little bit about the business practices that they use to actually enter and manage the data, and how a small bit about how they thought that a move to NIBRS would actually impact their agency. And by and large, I would say depending on the question being asked, between 80 and 90% of agencies said they collected the information that's required for the NIBRS standard. Not always. What we have learned in then going out one-on-one with these agencies and speaking to them directly is The data exists, there are some tweaks that need to occur, but for the most part, as Paul had mentioned, the way that we get summary data is for you to take all this rich data that you have in your systems already, law enforcement agencies have in their systems, I should say, and distill it down into something that doesn't help us as much. So we want to capitalize on what's already available for the most part. And then those smaller agencies that don't have an RMS system or that don't have the same kind of IT infrastructure, develop other methods for them to be able to participate as well. Not only through NCSX are we offering out the funding support, but we do have a pretty great team of consultants that works with us as the NCSX implementation team. This includes the IGES Institute, of which Paul is a member and works on our technical assistance team. It's headed up by RTI International, and it also involves partners from the IACP, from the Search Group, from the Police Executive Research Forum. Am I forgetting anything?
Search.
Yeah, I think I got everyone. So we have this whole consortium of folks who go out and provide support. We do readiness assessments, which are essentially needs assessments for the local agencies. What do they and do they not collect? What are some of the large-scale changes that they would have to make to how they manage data, how they train records management staff, how they train officers on entering incident reports? What are sort of those downstream activities that have to change in order to make the data valuable and to conform with the NIBRS standards? That usually serves as the basis for any funding requests that the agency makes. And we go out in person to have those meetings most of the time to try to get the buy-in and really understand the on-the-ground activities that are occurring with data management. Right now, also, I would say that we have a number of large agencies that are included as part of this effort. We really have made a full-scale push over the last year and a half, I would say, to engage with those agencies because, so MPD is one of those that you have more than 750 sworn officers, and they're really critical to our sample because the largest agencies, of course, make up the bulk of the crime counts in the country, and so in order to do any sort of decent statistical estimation, they're a crucial component, even though they make up such a small percentage of the total number of law enforcement agencies in the country. Right now, of the 10 largest cities in the country, we've got 7 of those 10 who are grantees in some form or fashion to the program. So we've made pretty good progress. I think overall we've got about almost 40 of those 72 largest agencies from the sample are covered by some sort of funding component that we have made available in the last couple of years. So there was a point at which, on the Crime Indicators Working Group, which was at the time chaired by former Philadelphia Commissioner Charles Ramsey and co-chaired by Terry Cunningham, who was the president of IACP. The reason I sort of give that out is because we had really crucial buy-in from pretty prominent leaders in law enforcement. And they had made the point that, I think it was Commissioner Ramsey specifically, who had made the point, large agencies don't want to do this alone. So he didn't want Philadelphia to be the only large agency making this move because there's a lot of exposure that agencies would really feel to making so much incident-based information available. And I think what we can safely say is now, they're all going together. We do have some gaps, of course, that we're trying to fill, but we've got a lot of large agencies involved. Chicago, Philadelphia,
Dallas.
Dallas. We're engaging right now with Houston. We've got a number of the Florida agencies that are about ready to come on board with their state. So we're really making good movement in that sense. And so I know there's fear about what moving to NIBRS can mean. Does it mean it's going to expose some sort of rise in the crime rate? Does it mean that there's going to be concerns about privacy of the individual persons that, can they be identified within the data? And knowing that you have partners from other large agencies that are making this move too can allow us to really tackle a lot of those questions, to do it in a comprehensive sort of way. And BJS and FBI CJIS are prepared to provide that kind of support to any of the agencies involved. And I guess in order to not take up too much time and to make sure that Heidi and Rosa have an opportunity to speak too, I would just say that the real value that I think that we see at the federal level for making this move is the ability to make these comparisons across jurisdictions. And it's not just at that incident-based level, although that is extremely valuable. We've gone on site with local agencies and they said, well, you know, we compare ourselves to agency X and agency Y, and sometimes we'll be talking to a Midwestern agency and they point to someone in the Southwest and someone in the mid-Atlantic area. And the question is, why do you make those comparisons? And no one has any empirical basis for it. They just believe that those are cities that compare to themselves, and they give us a list, and over time the list grows because they're throwing darts at the wall to try to see what kind of comparisons make sense. Even using summary-based data, we can more logically figure out which agencies compare to themselves. But the ability to drill down with the really detailed NIBRS data is going to tell you why you might compare to that city. So I can take metrics like poverty and single female-headed households and the percent poverty. Did I say poverty area? Percent poverty in the area. The education levels. All of these census measures. Add in crime information and come up with some comparisons, but I'm really not going to know what the phenomenon is within that local area. And that's what NIBRS enables us to do, to make those comparisons across places and look at specific crime types that we just can't do right now with summary-based data. And that's the real value that we see. I'm excited to use it to learn more about victimization of children, and I used to do a lot of work on elder abuse, and someday I'll get back there. Using these data is what I really hope for. So there's a lot that can really be done on sort of a topic-based level, but operationally, to make those comparisons, understand where you sit, and to maybe know who your community is that you really need to compare yourselves to, there's really a lot of rich value there. So making the data available, through data portals, that is such a wonderful way to engage the community and let everyone, be transparent, let everyone know where you sit. But to have the same data from one place to another has such power that I think that if we can get more and more agencies on this platform, then we will really be able to see that comparative perspective and make real use of the information over time. Trying to think if I forgot anything to discuss. I think that's it from my perspective, and I would also say that with more and more ability to analyze big data, a lot of what you're doing at the local level through the CJCC takes, we were talking about it, before we started this morning, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort to make those specific connections between systems at an incident basis or at a case basis. And to be able to track information across the system is amazingly valuable. We sit in a different place at BJS in terms of our push is to get federal data, nationally representative data. And so we have a difficult time making those connections one-on-one across the systems in the same sort of way that you're approaching it. And so in the interim, having data like NIBRS, being able to capitalize on what might be available in the courts and the corrections community, we can use these emerging big data techniques to look at a macro level, and not such a high macro level, county, federal jurisdiction, federal district level, state level. We can start to make connections at a slightly higher macro level across these systems using big data techniques, but not without the big data. And NIBRS is going to fill this huge critical component because it's the entrance to the justice system at the law enforcement level. And to be able to see what happened downstream and what happens upstream is going to change the way that we put out money, the way that we construct public policy. I think it's going to be very critical in the next, I would say, 10 to 15 years.
Thank you, Erica. Well, so what you've heard is that a lot of people in the country are moving to NIBRS. BJS is very, very supportive, as is the FBI, of the District of Columbia moving to NIBRS. But what we wanted to do, and to kind of get a discussion going in the room, was educate everyone in the room about what MPD is up to and what the challenges are faced. And so we have probably the two most knowledgeable people in MPD here to talk with you about this. Heidi Fieselmann is a special assistant to the Executive Office of Chief Newsham, where she manages the police chief's executive priority programs. But Heidi comes to this position with a background in data sciences, and most notably a master's degree in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, which is the most prestigious university, I think, in the country in this arena. So she's heavily involved in this strategic development of data science projects for MPD. And then the person who really makes the rubber meet the road and manages how to pull all this stuff together, Rosa Balarezo, is the crime data manager for MPD. So these two ladies are probably the best source of wisdom on what MPD is facing and what the movement towards NIBRS is likely to be. So I'm going to turn it over. Heidi, you want to start? Or?
Sure. So as Paul said, I am the special assistant to the chief of police. My focus is really kind of his strategic projects, and with a focus on data analysis, data science, data quality, and innovative ways to use our data. I think from MPD's perspective, I'll speak broadly about data, and then I'll kind of narrow in a little bit about NIBRS. Broadly, there's kind of a community expectation that we are open with our data, and we embrace that through kind of portals like Crime Map, and just kind of regularly working with our stakeholders and being very open about the types of data that we have and that we can provide, and it's getting better every month. And I think that when we've developed our systems, we've always had to kind of take into account both the operational needs. We need the systems to be working 24/7 so that our officers on the street they're not kind of stuck. And so there's kind of balancing that need with the kind of reporting, not just reporting requirements, but the kind of ways that we can best collect and use our data. I think a perfect example of sort of how we've been moving more towards the evidence-based policing and using our data in kind of different ways is our collaborations with the lab at DC and other research agencies. The entire agency, I think, is open to, we want the experts to kind of come in, look at our data, help us better understand how we can, whether it's formulating policies or standard operating procedures, how we can better train, how we can basically use the data to make smart decisions. And so I feel lucky that I get to kind of work with the chief on a regular basis to help advise on different ways that we can look at our data, and different people that can help us do that. In terms of, and I can speak broadly around NIBRS, and then I'll hand it off to Rosa, who can speak more from a technical perspective. So we've over the past 2 years, we've been internally assessing and evaluating our RMS. We switched to a new records management system in August of 2015. And so we've been kind of internally looking at the levels of effort it's going to take to meet the 2021 deadline. I think that speaking to kind of balancing those operational priorities of making sure that the transition is done in a thoughtful and appropriate way is something that we take into account. And I think that we under the value of looking at the data in the way that NIBRS breaks it down, I think it makes a lot of sense, and internally we do that. And we have, I think a big part of our operations and a growing part of our operations are around building our internal analytical capabilities. Right now we have about 5 different types of analysts
from investigative support analysts that kind of go case by case to our crime and law enforcement analysts that provide tactical and strategic ways to look at information, and they provide recommendations to our command staff officials and officers. So I think that, and the final thing I think I'll touch on is when we do, move and transition, I think that there will obviously need to be a change management and communications component to it. I think that the city and what we've seen from just working with the community, going to community meetings all the time, is that when you kind of explain the differences in numbers and you're kind of very, you stay on message and are very thoughtful about it, people understand, and they understand why a percentage might look like it's going up. They understand. We can explain the hierarchy rule. We can those things in policing. You explain a lot of complex and sometimes difficult concepts, and I think that that's something that we're absolutely open to. So with that I will pass it along to Rosa. Thank you, Heidi.
My name is Rosa Balarezo, and I am the manager of the UCR program for the NPD. Right now, we are using the summary report, but we are working towards the transition to the NIBRS. And basically, what I do is I develop and analyze the data from a UCR perspective. And twice a year, I submit the data to the FBI. Some of the reports that are submitted are specifically the Part 1 offenses, and then we have hate crime that we also submit, as well as the LEOCA, the law enforcement officers killed or assaulted. And I'm definitely looking forward to the NIBRS data, because I started kind of playing around with our new system, Cobalt, and we can say we're about 50% there. When we started designing Cobalt, we were working with Mark 43, our vendor. We were thinking towards NIBRS already. So we are, at this point, able to get most of the information that is required for NIBRS. But there's just some minor tweaks that will need to happen from a technical perspective. Officers will need to probably be trained on how to do certain things. From a system perspective, we're probably going to need to make some fields mandatory, because anybody, once they're in the line of duty and they're reporting, and if they can sometimes skip something, they'll skip it and put it in the narrative. And so we go to the narrative. We develop a lot of reports based on word searches and things like that to help us gather the data, collect the data, and actually either automate things as we go, thinking NIBRS as well, or for the statistical purpose of summary for now. But I am excited about NIBRS because when I do the LEOCA, the law enforcement assaulted or killed, officers assaulted or killed report, I can see exactly what time they're getting, what are the crucial times where these officers are getting hurt. So I'll talk about some numbers. It's like the times are from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. It's like almost every night. And the numbers have gone from 600 to 900 officers assaulted. Thank God we haven't really had any officers killed. But in 2016, that number went up to 1,500. So nobody's telling that story, and I think NIBRS will be able to tell that story as to exactly the circumstances, what happened, were they hurt by a juvenile or an adult, where did it happen? So looking at it from a law enforcement perspective, I do look forward to the detail. And we want to be more open to our community as well, so I think they will understand. Right now, with the summary, there is, let's say, there is an incident, and there's 3 offenses that happen. Let's say there's a burglary, and then the offender sexually abused the person, the victim, and then realized that when this went out of hand and actually killed the person. From a summary perspective, we would just submit the homicide. But from a NIBRS perspective, we'll actually be telling the story. This is how this crime started. but this is how it ended. So we will be able to actually provide all three, information on all three offenses that happened in that simple incident.
Thank you. I'm delighted to hear your enthusiasm, Rosa, and I think Rosa made a very good point that one of the benefits of NIBRS is a increase in the transparency with the public, so that many agencies throughout the country that have moved to NIBRS are publishing that incident data with none covering up the identity, anonymizing the data, but publishing the data so that anyone in the community can do their own analysis of crimes and of incidents of crime and look at some of these numbers. And this is certainly a national trend, and as we're seeing that police departments want to improve their transparency and realize that that's one way to restore the trust of the community, which is we've seen eroding in the last few years. There's two other comments I want to sort of add to this. Your former police chief, Chuck Ramsey, as Erica mentioned, chaired this criminal indicators working group as he was commissioner in Philadelphia, and he led that group in a discussion to suggest that it's really time for the police profession at large to think more, rather than think about their purpose being responding to specific crimes and just dealing reactively, that he suggested that the purpose of policing needs to be more expressed in terms of community wellness. And once you start thinking along those lines and start thinking about how do you define wellness of a community, even a neighborhood, in terms of the safety, both the actual safety and the perception of safety by the citizens, to improve that police-community relationship, you start thinking along the lines of how do we make the data available across public entities, research organizations, university academics, and other parts of the system. Even if you're in pretrial services and you're interested in doing a better job of risk assessment, you want to understand the context of crime, not just the numbers, but what has that person been involved in, and the historical perspective. And NIBRS gives you much more of that capability to focus on the context, which we have shown over and over again from research is a very important factor in everything from risk assessment to sentencing to, so the data that comes out of NIBRS is of value for those kinds of assessments in every part of the criminal justice system, not just in the police field, where it certainly has many, many applications. So that's the kind of message that we want to leave you with.